Hey guys, so where we're going to be going next with the class, and we'll actually end the semester on this set of skills, is starting to work with particles. Now, our big assignment that we're going to do at the end, for the end of the class, like your last big project, is going to be able to learn how to create a particle system that will drive things around, like fish swimming around, butterflies flying around, or people running around, or something like that, where you start to create a flocking system or a crowd system or something along those lines. Now, before we get there, though, this stuff there won't be an assignment related to it, but I really implore you to actually work through this, because this type of stuff is getting used to the particle systems that Maya has to offer. Now, granted, Maya is not Houdini; like it doesn't have quite as much abundance as abilities as Houdini does, but we can still do some fun things with it. So these videos that you will be getting, I really do want you to work through. Yes, it's kind of on the honor system, but it's going to pay off when you get to the big assignment, right? Because you're going to start to understand where we're going on things and what we're doing. If you just wait to the final assignment to dive into the particles and don't do these additional videos, there might be a lot of stuff that's confusing that we're going to be walking through early on. So, okay, so for today, essentially something like this is what we're going to be creating with Maya. Now, as you can see, this is in After Effects, and I've comped this a little bit, and I've added some glows and some things like that, right? So it feels almost like the little side of a galaxy or something along those lines, right? I'm not going to go into the compositing side of things. It really wasn't too hard, right? Just a lot of taking your curves and contrasting and adding glows. But the compositing side of things is a discussion for another day in another class. Okay, so first off, let's drop down a plane. So I'm holding Shift and right-clicking, and it'll bring up this little menu, and I can find plane. Okay, or if you just want to come up here and drop a plane down from here too, you could totally do that. I'm going to scale this up about to the size of the grid. And from here, we want to add some particle effects, okay? And so we need this plane to emit particles. And so the way we do that is we're going to come over to Modeling, and we're going to come down to FX, okay? And once we're in FX, we're going to make sure that we have our plane selected. We're going to come to this little menu that says In Particles, and we're going to come down to Emit from Object. So I'm going to click that. Now there's going to be some problems right away. So if I'm going to angle it like this, just so you guys can see the problems, and I'm going to start to play this. And so right off the bat, this is like raining particles, and it's raining them from the vertices, right? So wherever there's like vertices, we're emitting particles just from those vertices, and then they're falling. So I don't want that. I want particles to be emitted everywhere on this object, and I want them just to stick to the object, right? I don't want them falling down. So let's look at how we would fix some of that. So I'm going to click this little rewind button, and I'm going to come over here to my attribute editor, and I'm going to come over here where it says Pt1, and I'm going to click the little plus sign next to it, and if I click in here, you'll see Emitter 1, right? So I'm going to click on Emitter 1, and this takes me to my Emitter 1 tab, okay? And then if I come down here, I'll see the basic emitter attributes, and then the emitter type is set to Omni. And actually, we want to change that to Surface, okay? And so now if I click play, it's going to emit all over from the surface. It's still falling, but now it's no longer just emitting from like the vertices or the points on the surface. Okay, so let's fix some of the other stuff. So I'm going to scroll down to where we see basic emission speed attributes. I'm going to find speed, and I'm going to turn the speed off. The speed actually pushes up, and so when we turn gravity off, instead of the particles falling, they would actually start to rise a little bit. And so I'm just going to go ahead and turn that off right now since I know what it's going to do. I'm going to go ahead and fix that right now. Okay, the next thing that we need is you should see a Nucleus 1 tab, or you could come out here and you can see Nucleus 1 in the outliner. Either way, however you get to it, we just want to go to this tab. And down here we'll see Gravity and Wind. I'm just going to take this slider and I'm going to drop it all the way to 0. And so now, click this little rewind button. I'm going to click play. And now you can see that we are getting particles that stick to our object. Now the problem is we don't have very many particles, so we want to increase our particle count. So let's go back up here where it says Emitter 1, or again you can click on Emitter 1 here. And I'm going to add 3 extra zeros in here, right? So there's 2, and I'm going to add 3 more zeros. So 1, 2, 3. Okay, and I'm going to hit enter. Alright, click rewind, click play, and now we can see we're filling this up with a lot more particles. Now, these particles are pretty boring in color, and at the present, they're all just white, right? Now, we could change all of these to be a different color, like black or blue, right? But I might want each particle to have a different color, right? That might make this feel a little more dynamic and a little more interesting. So how would we go about doing that? Setting up like a per particle coloring system as compared to all the colors have, or all the particles have the same color. Well, if we come down here, I'm going to click these little double arrows and rewind it. Let's take a look at our particle system. So I'm going to come in here, I'm going to click on End Particle 1. And let's go to our emitter 1 because we want to emit color. We'll dive into our particle stuff here in a little bit, but not quite yet. So in emitter 1, let's scroll all the way to the bottom. Now we can see that there's a particle color, and so we can start working with this sort of stuff. Okay, but before I actually do that, I want to get a sense of the color that I'm putting on here. So to do that, let's come up here to our shader ball, and let's click on our shader ball. That's going to open up our hypershade. And right now, anything in the scene is going to just have this Lambert 1 just automatically assigned to it. And so, since there's nothing else in the scene, I'm just going to use the Lambert 1. I could create another material and that sort of stuff, but that's okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on Lambert 1. I'm going to come here, I'm going to click the double arrows, and that's going to graph Lambert 1. So you click it here, click these double arrows, and it's going to bring it all down here. Okay, so from here, I've got Lambert 1 selected, and I can see that Lambert 1 is right here. So we want to go ahead and add a color onto our Lambert 1, and if we come to color, we'll see a little checker box right off to the side. So I'm going to click on that checker box, and that's going to pull up this Create Render node. And so we want to attach like a file to it. So make sure that you do not click PSD file. This will cause you problems. This is what we want. So do not click that. We want to make sure that we're clicking on file, not PSD file. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And now you can see that I have a file out here. And file 1 is right here too. So we want to get an image associated with that file. So if you look at image name, there's a folder off to the right here. I'm going to click on that folder. And let's see. Just go navigate, copy that file path. So wherever you put your image, you can just go ahead and start navigating to that. Since I already had it open, I just went and copied the file path. I'm going to hit enter. But you can navigate out here to find it, that sort of stuff. But at this point, I've got my flower. So this is going to just put some interesting different colors. Okay, and so I'm going to click open. Cool. Now if I look out here in my screen, I don't really see anything different. Okay, unless I click this little texture icon. Now the shortcuts for that, if I click the number 5 on my keyboard, and then if I click 6, if you notice when I click 6 that this little icon toggles on 5, 6, 5, 6, right? So 5 and 6 will toggle that sort of stuff on. 4 will do wireframes, but I don't really want to do that right now. So I'm going to do 6 just so I can see the colors on the actual plane. And so now we want to get the color of the plane essentially onto the color of the particles. And it's not yet, right? If I play again, we'll see that the particles are still white. And so let's go ahead and start to fix that. So again, let's come back in here and let's click on Emitter 1. And make sure on Emitter 1 that we're all the way at the bottom. And that's where we're going to see this texture emission attributes. Okay, and we're going to see this particle color. Now, what I could do is I could click on this little checker box, and I could click on File, and I could go through the whole same process of finding these flowers, that flower image, and that would be 100% fine. Like, if you have problems with the next step, then just do that, right? You just come here, particle color, click on the checker box, you click on File, and you go find that image, and it'll put this same image onto here. But it will be doing it from 2 different nodes, so to speak, but it will work perfectly. Since I don't want to necessarily duplicate nodes, okay, again, there's nothing wrong with doing it the other way, but I'm just going to try to stay a little more economical. So I'm going to just take the actual texture that's associated to the Lambert and actually put that same little file node right here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here and I'm going to click on my shader ball. Okay. And in your hypershade, you're going to see, if you look up here, you'll see materials, you'll see textures, you'll see utilities, rendering, lights, all this sort of stuff. Okay. We want to go to textures, right? And there's file 1. It's actually right here too, but let's ignore that right now, right? I don't want you to accidentally break anything here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to shrink this window a little bit. Okay, so if you accidentally, like, say, clicked on the file and it brings the file up over here, we really want the emitter 1 over here in our attribute editor. So let's click back on our emitter 1. Okay, and so what I want to do is I want to be able to see file 1 right here, and I want to see emitter 1 and the particle color right here. And so from this view, what I'm going to do is I'm going to if I use my middle mouse button and I click on this, it won't change this. If I left click on it, it will. Okay, click back on that. But if I use my middle mouse button and I click on this file, nothing is going to happen. So I'm going to middle click and hold, and I'm going to drag all the way over onto the word particle color. And you can see a little outline has popped up. And I'm just going to let go of my middle mouse button now. And it's now taken this file and put it into the particle color. All right, cool. So at this point, you might be feeling like, okay, great, we've got this, right? So if I click play right now, it's going to have particle color. Not yet. There's a few things we have to do. And one of these is to check this little box that says inherit color. Now, it's still not going to work, and you're going to see a little warning when this pops up. Let's go ahead and look at that. Okay, and this down here, if you read this, this says, warning, in particle shape 1 does not have the following attribute, RGB PP. Please add this attribute in order for inheritance to work. So what is RGB PP? Okay, well, RGB, that's red, green, blue, and then the PP stands for per particle. So essentially RGB is color. So it's saying that we need an attribute that is color on a per particle basis, which means each color can have its, or each particle can have its own color. Okay, so how do we set that up for all this to work? Well, that's when we need to go over to our in particle 1. So I'm going to click right here, in particle 1. And if you come down here, there's a lot of stuff in here, right? But what you're wanting to find is you want to look for add dynamic attributes. And let's go ahead and click on that. And we'll see that there's general, opacity, and color. So under add dynamic attributes, let's click on the box for color. And this is going to bring up a little window. And you'll see that this says add per particle attribute. Well, we click color, so it's going to add a per particle attribute for color. So let's go ahead and put a check mark next to the per particle attribute, and let's click add attribute. Okay, now let's click play. This is looking a little different. So let's go ahead and let's click on our Pt1, and I'm going to click H to hide, and let's play that again. So now you can see that our particles actually have inherited the color system from that file, the picture of the flowers. All right, cool. So this is gonna make our particles look a little more interesting, okay? But let's start to do something a little more fun with this. So let's come in here and let's click on our in particle 1, and we're gonna add some fields to it. Now, if I don't have anything selected and I add a field, well, it's not gonna do anything to anything. You need to first select your particles, and then we'll add some fields. That way the particle or the fields know what they're trying to affect. So make sure you select in particle 1. We're gonna come up to fields and solvers, and I'm gonna come down to turbulence. Okay. And now I'm going to add another field. So turbulence is going to make this real noisy, and it's actually, well, we can just look at it. So let's rewind this. Now I'm going to set the magnitude of the turbulence to 50. So you can think of magnitude as strength, okay? A little technically different, but basically that's what it is, right? The strength. And attenuation is like how far it reaches, and frequency, right? Remember those little waves that if you remember back from science class. Essentially, you don't need to really understand all that. Just know if you bring up the frequency, you're going to add way more detail, right? And if you have this at a lower number, it's going to be less detail, right? So bigger wavelengths and so forth. Okay, at this point, I'm going to leave all that alone. I just increased the strength to 50. And I'm going to go ahead and click play. And you can see what we're getting, right? It's starting to just run a turbulent noise through our particle system. Okay, which is kind of neat. Let's go ahead and rewind that. Let's go ahead and spin our particles as well. So I'm going to click on our in particle 1 again. And I'm going to come up to fields and solvers, and let's go down to where is it? Vortex. Now there's a bunch that you can play with, and I would encourage you to definitely play with this. In fact, you could even affect the particle system with like a fluid type behavior, but we're not going to get into all that. So for right now, we're just going to do vortex. Cool. And let's take our magnitude for our vortex, and let's turn that up to like say 35. Okay. Now the turbulence is going to make it noisy, just like you saw, and the vortex is going to start to spin it. So let's see what we get now if we click play. And I'm going to lengthen our timeout to like 200. And let's click play. Now you can see, let's stop that. Now you can see we're starting to get something kind of interesting. And there's a lot more stuff that you can do. I'm not going to get too heavy into this right now, but under your in particle, there's dynamic properties. You could play with your conserve, drag, and all this sort of stuff. You can get some fun behaviors with that. There are collisions and things like that, but we're not going to worry about all that for right now. So essentially, we just want something like this. And so if we render right now, this will be completely black. And that's because there's no lights. First off, though, we need to make sure that we're rendering with Arnold. So to make sure that we are doing that, let's come up here to the little clapper with the gear. And if we click on that, we should see this render using. And then if we click on this, we should see Arnold renderer in here. And so we just want to select that. Now, if you open up this menu, like you click right here and you look in here and you don't see Arnold renderer, you need to enable that in your plugins, and let me show you how to do that. So if you come up here, you go to Windows, down to Settings and Preferences, and over to Plugin Manager. I'm going to click on that, and then if you just type MTOA, so M is in man, T is in Tim, O is in Onyx, and A is in Arnold. This will find the MTOA plugin. And you just want to make sure that these little boxes have check marks. And if they do, then you should be able to come back in here and click on this menu, and you should see the Arnold renderer in there. Okay, so we're going to use the Arnold renderer. Okay, so let's add some lights to the scene. Now I'm going to do this part kind of quick, so if you have any questions or anything like that, hit me up and we can talk more about it. Okay, so first off, I want to throw down just a general ambient light just to kind of add some environment light. So I'm going to come up to Arnold, and we're going to go down to lights, and we're going to go down to sky dome light. Okay. Right now, this sky dome light is just a giant white color. It's going to be very boring. So we want to come over to the little checkerboard box, click on that, and then we're going to click on File. And then in here, I'm going to click on the folder. And I will send you guys some HDR Eyes and play around with this, right? Because this could make things really interesting. I'm just going to randomly grab one in here. So I know this isn't really a spacey scene, but I just want just some general ambient light. So I'm just going to do the Cathedral 03, and I'll drop that on there. Now, if I render this, I will see the actual cathedral, this whole background image, right? So this whole background image will light our image, but we can also see it as well. And so I want it to light things, but I don't want to see it. So if I just click in the back, I'll select this AI Sky Dome light. And then over here, if I just scroll down, I'm going to take the camera to 0. And then I'm going to just turn some of this other stuff off, like specular and subsurface and volume. Actually, I'll keep the volume on. Just because it's not really going to affect things. Turning those off is just going to make it render a little faster. Now, this camera visibility, you do want that at 0. Because that determines whether you can see it in the background or not. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I want to drop like a general hot light source right in the middle. So I'm just going to come over here to create, down to lights, and we're going to drop in a point light. Cool. Now, right now it's going to shine forever, and I don't want to do that. I do want the light to lose intensity over time. So I'm going to click on decay rate, and you should recognize linear, quadratic, and cubic from like your previous math classes, that those fall off curves. I'm going to go with quadratic because it calculates a little bit quicker than cubic, but it's a little nicer than linear. Okay, so I'm going to just do quadratic. And now for color, let's actually click on the color swatch. Okay, and over here we'll have this little color wheel. So I want to take this little line and put it somewhere where it's kind of warmer. And then here I want to take this little dot and I want to pull it over to the side. And so this is going to be a pretty even kind of gold glow throughout. But I want it to, as it falls off, right, I want it to start white and fall off through like a gold glow. And so the way we can do this is if we come to this B, we can kind of burn this light. So let's change it from 1 to something like 10. Okay. And so from here, you can see, right, we're getting like this goes from white to gold to darker and darker, right? So I'm just going to pull this out here some into this white area, and we're going to get some nice fall off with that. And I might take that B and turn that back to 10, even burn it a little bit more. Cool. So we're going to be from 1, and it's going to fall off that direction. All right, so from this point, I want to take the intensity because it's going to die really quick with the particles blocking it, and I want to crank that intensity up. So we're going to go like to something like 100, and let's just take a really quick picture and see what we're getting out. And the way we do that is if we come up here to this little blank clapboard, we click on that, it will render us an image of where we're at. All right, cool. So we can see that we're already starting to get something. Now, keep in mind, I've got this resolution really low, but it just renders faster, and so it's just going to give us these real low res previews, but it's just a smarter way to work, right? Render faster, and then when you get closer to the end, then you can start to up-res things. Okay, so let's add some additional stuff. I mean, that's looking cool, but we can add some more stuff. So let's add a glow, right? I would like this light to start feeling like it's glowing. So let's close that. Right? So right now it's only lit wherever there's particles, but I would like for there to feel like there's a glow off in here. And so the way we would do that is if we come up to the little clapper with the little gear next to it or on it right there. Let's click on that. And what we want to do is we want to come down to make sure that we're in our Arnold Rendered tab. And we want to come down to where it says Environment. We're going to click on Environment. And there's a little atmosphere area. And we're going to click the little checker box for atmosphere. And then out of here, we're going to go to this Create AI Atmosphere Volume. Okay. I already made one. You probably don't see that, but just go to this. Okay. Create AI Atmosphere Volume. Cool. Now, if we render right now, we're not going to see anything, and that's because there's no density. So I'm going to add a little bit of density, just a little bit. I don't want it to be too crazy. So I've got 0.01, okay, for density. And now I'm going to take another picture, and we're going to see what that looks like. All right, cool. So this is definitely doing some interesting stuff. We're starting to get these God rays and things like that. And you might really like this and just want to stop right there. Now, for me, I would like to control how far these God rays like go off, right? They're just going on and on and on, right? As the light falls off in intensity. But I do want it to be that hot. So how do we control that, right? To where we can just kind of keep these little rays kind of just a little more central. Well, let's take a look at how we might do that. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drop down a sphere into the middle of everything. So you can just click sphere, you can shift right click and go to sphere. Okay. And let's scale this sphere up. Okay, so I'm going to scale this up somewhere to around 13, right? So you just want the scale X, Y, and Z for this to be around 13. Now, if it's bigger, you can make it bigger and so forth, but I just want it covering the area roughly like that. The next thing we want to do is we want to add some divisions to the sphere. So I'm going to come back to my attribute editor. I'm going to go to my Polysphere 1 tab, and we can see these subdivisions. I want to change this to 200 and 200, and I'm going to hit enter. Okay. Now, we want to make sure that we are in our modeling tab. And we're going to go to, with the sphere selected, we're going to go to deform. And we're going to go down to texture deformer, right? Because what we're doing would work, but this sphere shape is so round, it's just very boring and it would look way too uniform. So we're going to chunk that up a little bit, and then that's going to capture some of those God rays for us. Okay, so texture deformer. Let's change this point space to local, the direction to normal. And for our texture, let's go ahead and click this little checker box at the end. And let's go find noise. And so I'm going to select noise. And I want to take the frequency and let's push that up to maybe like 9. Okay, and then for our amplitude, let's pull that down a little bit. This is going to help as we start to push things. So maybe something like that. Cool. And I think we're good there for that. So if you click this arrow, this will take you right here. This will take you back to your texture deformer, or you can come over here and select texture deformer and then just make sure that you're in your texture deformer 1 tab. Either way, it'll get you back here. Okay, so from here, we want to crank up the strength. Now the offset needs to be whatever the strength is divided by 2 and a negative of that. And so you could write an expression. I'm not going to do that right now, but you could write an expression to link those up. So for me, I'm going to go ahead and just crank up the strength. So if I crank up that strength, right, and we can see that we're getting this spiky ball, well, it's pushing out too far, so I need to pull it back in some. So it needs to be half of this and negative. So that would be negative 9.5. Cool. So now we have this little spiky ball. that's going to help capture some of those rays and keep it just kind of central and localized to that. Okay, and so I think you can see how this is more interesting than just a very circular sphere, right? Okay, so from here, I don't want to keep this anymore. This will cause problems with what we're about to do next. So we essentially need to take this texture deformer and bake it into the geometry, right? And so the way we do that is click P-Sphere1, and we're going to delete the histories. So edit, delete by type, and history. And you can see there is no longer a texture deformer. It is gone, and this is just now our geometry, okay? So before you delete histories, you should really make sure that you like the shape that you've got here, okay? All right, so P-Sphere1, let's make that into a light or a mesh light. And the way we do that, with that selected, we're going to go to Arnold, down to Lights, and over to Mesh Lights. All right, cool. And so what we're going to do is we want to match this color to our point lights color. And so if I click this little color swatch, you'll notice that there's a bunch of colors up here. Well, the color work that we've done so far has been saved up here. And so if I click on this one, this was the last work that we did was the point light, so it should just match the point light. So if I click on that, yeah. And so you can see that this is now matching what we did with the point light. And so I think we're good there. The next thing we want to do is we just want to play with the exposure and the intensity and things like that. So let's just take this exposure and let's put it up to 4 and let's see how that's looking. And so exposure to 4, we set our light, exposure to 4. Let's go click the little blank clapboard and see what we're getting. All right, so essentially you can see what this has done is it's taken the light rays that we had going all over the place and it's captured it inside of this sphere. Now I can glow this out a little bit more, and I think I want to do that. But I wanted you to see is essentially what's happening here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn up the exposure to 8. And this will allow this to capture the light, but even allow it to glow a little bit beyond this even. Okay, so let's take one more render. All right, so from here you can see it's allowing it to glow a little beyond just little spiky areas. Now, I do want to bring that in a little bit, so 8 might have been a little much. But the other fun thing we can do here is we can still change the size of this. So if I use my scale tool, I can flatten that out a little bit. So I'm just grabbing just the top. Now if I hold control in the top, I can make it grow outwards but not up. Okay, so I'm going to just grow that out a little bit more. Maybe something like that. And maybe we'll drop that to 7. And let's just see what that looks like. So at this point, I think you can see kind of where we're at with things and how you can start to design and play with this. I'm going to throw one last thing at you, and then you guys can take it and start to do your own design. So if I click on the particles, if we come down here, I want you guys to be aware of one last thing. If we come down to shading, we can see that our particle type, and we have these points. Well, you could do something like multi-points, and what that's going to do is that's going to, for every point there is, it's going to throw like more points there. And so right now it's doing a multi-point of 10, but you could bring that down to like, for every point now there's only like 3 points. And then you have this radius, right? So it could get really kind of blurry, or you could kind of keep that in somewhat close. And it's just going to add a bit more particles. So if you look, for example, at these 3 particles, let me see if I can kind of get them in the screen. I don't know if you can see that very well, but there's like a particle here, and a particle here. If I bring in that multi-radius, you'll see that they start to collapse into like 1. And so you could just have something like this where they're just kind of barely separated. And so it's just going to increase your particle count and make things a little thicker. And I'm going to take one last render. And then at this point, I think you guys can start to play around and design your own stuff. Okay, cool. So this is kind of starting to look interesting. So I'm just going to take a larger render, and then we'll wrap up. And so the way you would do a larger render is you just come over here to the clapper with the gear, come over to common, and then if you come down to this HD presets, you can click on that and then go find something like 10 HD by 1080, or you could just type in your numbers. And I'm just going to take a picture of this and see how that's looking. All right, so there you go. At this point, I think that gives you everything that you need to start designing your own thing. Now, in the other image that I showed you, like I had taken a couple additional point lights or a few more and kind of spread them out throughout the particles and made them kind of less intense, but just kind of give the sense that like there's like these little stars and things like that. And again, just to kind of remind you, that's just kind of what I ended up with there. You could take, again, start putting some different light sources, some different places, and you could start to and then bring it over into something like After Effects and add some glows and some things like that. And so anyways, I hope this has been helpful, and yeah, no assignments related to this, but it should help get you kind of initiated into particle systems in Maya. We're going to be taking this even further and start playing around with some other fun ideas with it, and yeah, so we've got more to come, but play around with this for now and start getting used to particle systems.